So it was Gospel of John and chapter 2 from verse 13 down to 25. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then responded to him, "What sign can you show us to prove your authority to do all this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it again in 3 days." They replied, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to raise it in 3 days." But the temple he had spoken of was his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples recalled what he had said. Then they believed the scripture and the things that Jesus had spoken. Now, while he was in Jerusalem at the Passover festival, many people saw the signs he was performing and believed in his name. But Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. Shall we pray together? Lord, we thank you for this reading today. And Lord, we ask you that you would speak into our lives and into our hearts, that you would show us more about yourself and draw us to yourself and make us to be your disciples. So we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So do you understand what was going on here in this passage? You had Jesus going up to Jerusalem, and it's the Passover time, and the Passover was a big festival for the Jews, because they were celebrating when God had freed them from the people of Egypt and led them out of Egypt. And it was a time when they gathered together to remember that, and they would do all various religious rituals and go to the temple. But here, Jesus, who was of course a Jew, was going up to Jerusalem to be part of this, and he goes into the temple area. But he sees something happening that is just really not right and unjust, and he sees people taking advantage of the situation. And in a sense, they're taking advantage of God and of the people who were there. Because what was happening is, in order to come and to sacrifice, you had to buy these various animals. But to buy them, you had to have the Jewish currency. But most of the people would have the Roman one. So they would go in, and for a start, have you ever been on holiday and you go to change some money, you forget to do it, and you go to the airport, and you see the amount of money you're going to get for changing, and you can have a terrible exchange rate and a huge commission. Well, it's a bit like this kind of situation. They were going to buy these animals to perform their sort of religious ritual, and when they were buying it, they were getting a terrible exchange rate and a terrible commission. And really, it's people that are taking advantage of the people going to worship. And it's quite easy for us just to read this passage and to skip over this bit and to think, well, that's terrible. You know, those people that were there taking advantage, taking that commission, given a bad exchange rate. You know, those terrible Jews of the time, almost to point a finger at them. I think, well, I would never be like that. You know, I would never take advantage. But I was thinking a little bit about that. And can we really say that? Is it possible that we can find ourselves looking to take advantage of God or of other people? And I was just reflecting on this. It's interesting, sometimes you see various programs on TV, and it can be Christian preachers, and that would probably be the most obvious example, where you have people who are really touting for money in order to be able to pray for people. Or they'll say, yeah, if you pledge this amount of money, then you might be healed. You know, this kind of thing. You sometimes see it on TV, and it's really taking advantage of people's desire to look to God and taking advantage of the people themselves. So there can be very similar things happen quite literally to what we've seen here. But also there can be other much more subtle ways. And I think they're all things that we can find ourselves falling into. Is it possible that we can be, rather than being followers of Jesus, we can slip into being superstitious? Maybe think, okay, if I just go along to church, if I do the right things, pray the right things, then God will give me what I want. So we're going to church because we want to get something from God. We want to gain something. And I think it is possible for each of us to slip into that. And I remember I've told the story of when I was in a church one time, and there was people praying, and they were all praying at once. And I remember there was the guy next to me was crying out fervently in prayer, and he was sort of praying to God, "Oh God, will you give me a much bigger and better car?" And I was sort of like listening, but almost wanted to elbow him in the ribs. I'm thinking, is that really what you're here for? You know, are you coming here to act in a certain way, hoping that God will give you just what you want? So people can come in a superstitious way, hoping to gain something from God. We can also, though, come to the place of worship with a sense of ambition, with wanting to find ourselves in a place of authority, or wanting to find ourselves with control over people. Maybe we want to be recognised for our gifts that we have. And we want people to see how good we are at a certain instrument, or we want people to see how good we are. And all sorts of things. There could be this ambition and wanting to be recognised. And people can come almost with a sense of ownership over certain things. I remember one time I went to do a ceilidh in a church, and it was a church, they had a big coffee morning, sort of thing, a bit like ours, but it had been going for 50 years, and there was about 200 people came along to the coffee morning every week. And so they asked me if I would bring along a ceilidh band. So I brought along a few friends. It wasn't a normal ceilidh band, but it was just other people that I knew. And it was interesting, we sort of set up, and then there was these two guys that were in charge of the sound desk, you know, a bit like this thing up the front, but they were up at the back. And the truth is that if they hadn't been there, we probably could have just plugged in, set up, adjusted the stuff and been ready to play in 5 minutes. But the two of them, for some reason, both of them, thought that they wanted to be the person in charge, or thought that was their role. And so they both kept changing things back and forth, and it was practically like they were fighting over this, because they just had this role that they wanted to do, and they were angry at the other one for intruding on their space. And it was really quite embarrassing. And actually the people that were with me, they weren't Christians, the other people playing, and I wonder what on earth they were thinking about these people in this church. and I was embarrassed at the situation. So I thought, what kind of Christian example is that? These people, they weren't serving, they weren't there to serve, they were there because they had their role. They had this thing that they wanted to do that had become part of their identity, this ambition. So we can come with a sense of superstition sometimes. Maybe we can come with ambition or desire for power or position. Or simply come thinking, what can I receive? What can I receive from other people? A bit like those people were sitting at their tables for changing money, and they were thinking to themselves, okay, I hope I get all this, a certain amount of money today from changing, people changing money. We can come sometimes with a sense of, what am I going to receive from this service? What am I going to gain from it myself? And if we're not careful, that almost becomes the only thing that we think about. And it's okay to come, to look in, to meet with God, looking to gain from being here. That's part of why we come. But we're a family, aren't we, of people with different gifts, different abilities. Each of us has strengths, things that we can share. It might be that I'm the pastor, but there's other people with pastoral sort of gifts, ways of being able to be there for others, being able to talk to people or care for them. Maybe I play an instrument, but there's other musicians, and it's good that they step up and help, or I'd just be burnt out. So we all come with different gifts. And I suppose actually the role of the minister is not even to do everything, is it? The role of the minister in a Baptist church is to facilitate things, to encourage each of us to share, each of us to learn to come to the place of giving and of encouraging one another. Because I'm just a person like any of you. Before I was a minister, I worked in a homeless hostel and helped out in the church in different ways. Maybe helped with youth or helped with music, and was a deacon for a while, and then eventually I ended up doing it full time, just as a way to help out churches. So I'm not necessarily any different to anybody else here, and each of us are to be on that journey of thinking, well, how can we serve? And interestingly, it's often when you get to the place of serving that you most meet with God. As you look to think, how can I bless others? How can I help out? How can I share? That's when you see God at work in your life. Because often you'll be in situations and you might have to pray for someone or be there for someone, and you're standing there thinking, by myself I wouldn't be able to do anything. And you need God to be there. You need God to turn up. And so just to put it in a sort of blunt sort of way, are you still in the place of suckling, or are you moving to serving? So we can come with superstition, ambition, desire for position, looking just simply to receive. You see, there's all these ways that we can come to take advantage of God, or to take advantage of others, and they can slip into our mindset or into our heart. And all of us probably come with mixed motives. So probably as I'm looking through, or as I was talking through these different things, there might be little things that you almost recognise. And there's always going to be little seeds of each one of these things, because each of us has little seeds of sin in us. And it's up to us to put that to death and to think, well, I'm not going to let that rise up in me. And I'm going to go about things the right way. Why did Jesus come into the midst of us? He came to serve, and he encouraged his disciples to serve one another and minister to one another, look after one another. At the end we'll sing the song, Make Me a Channel of Your Peace, and talking about how it is in giving to others that we receive. And it's possible that if we don't move to that place of learning to serve one another, we can become disillusioned, and we can think, I don't get anything. I don't actually get anything from coming to church. But actually, is that the main question? You know, have we found ourselves like the people sitting at the table for changing money? Or are we going to be people that serve? Did you feel uncomfortable with Jesus in this passage? Because he doesn't come across maybe the way that we'd like him to come across, does he? Turning over the tables, making a whip, and like driving the animals out. It doesn't say in the passage that he whipped the people, but it says he drove them all out, the cattle and the sheep. And then he speaks to the people afterwards, doesn't he? So he hadn't whipped the people, but he did make a whip and chase out the animals, and turned over the tables in anger. Imagine if I sort of came in and started throwing the pulpit around. You'd be a little bit surprised, wouldn't you? And do we feel uncomfortable with Jesus? Have you ever watched or read any of the Narnia series? And there's a Messiah sort of figure in it, who's the lion, Aslan. And there's at least one point in the series in the books where it talks about how Aslan is not a tame lion, he's a wild lion. And sometimes we want to tame Jesus. We want to maybe put him in a vase with flowers at the front, or we want to encapsulate him in nice songs. We want to turn him into meek and gentle Jesus only. But the thing is that Jesus is never a pushover. If you actually think through the Gospels and all the things that happens, he could be quite confrontational with people. So he could challenge people. He challenges the Pharisees and he actually calls them whitewashed tombs. Imagine if I called you a whitewashed tomb. What would you think? You might be a little bit angry. He did things that other people thought were inappropriate or saw as inappropriate. So when someone who had committed adultery was around, he didn't say we should stone them, he actually forgave them. And he let someone else wash his feet, didn't he, with perfume on their hair. So he does things that other people thought were inappropriate. He had meals with tax collectors and sinners. So he wasn't scared to do things that other people looked at and judged. You think about the story of when Peter steps out on the water, and you think, well, Peter must have been brave. Well, if he was brave because he'd seen Jesus walking on the water, what about Jesus? When Jesus walked out on the water, he hadn't seen anybody do it. And he went, and he had that boldness to do it. It's an interesting story when Jesus reads from a scroll and talks about how he's the anointed one and the Spirit's on him. And the crowd sort of turn against him and they think, right, we're going to throw him off a cliff. So there must have been a bit of a rabble. It just says that Jesus walked through them. So, and what does that mean? Do you think he just like miraculously disappeared and they didn't see him? But I just suggest you, no, that's not what happened. I suggest you, Jesus had a strength of character, and he was really a man in the way that a man should be a man. You know, there were people like were maybe shouting in his face, angry at him, thinking, oh, we're going to throw him off. But there was something about him, a steeliness or a strength, that they were thinking, wait a minute, he doesn't seem to be scared of us. You know, how they maybe thought twice about grabbing him, because this was a man who was a carpenter, a strong man, and they could see that there was something different about him, and he had this strength. And perhaps they were scared to grab hold of him, and he was able to walk through the middle of them. So Jesus isn't a pushover, and maybe if we met him, would we be uncomfortable with him? I wonder what it would be like if he came in here. Would he be the Jesus that we want him to be? You know, would he be the soft Jesus? Would he put up with when we have our own little tables that we set up with all the things that we want to gain from God? You know, maybe he would come and he would turn it over. do we allow Jesus to speak to us? Do we allow the real Jesus to speak to us? When we hear the little voice saying, well, maybe I am looking to gain from others or gain from God, will we listen to his whisper and give our life to him, to serve and to follow him? And why does Jesus turn over the tables and drive out the animals? Because he's angry, and he's angry with injustice. So he sees these people taking an advantage, and it's most likely the poorest people being taken advantage of, and he's not happy with that, and he goes and he shows that, and he drives them out. And there's a challenge for us, as people. Are we willing to fight for what is right? Are we willing to stand up and to be strong? Sometimes perhaps we try to tame people in the church and make them ultra nice people, but maybe there's an element of which we need to become people that fight for what is right. And often you'll see churches, they don't have as many men around, and I would maybe suggest that, I don't want to fall into stereotypes, but men are people that like to have something to fight for, don't they? They like to have a cause to fight for, and sometimes we cut off the cause of Jesus and we lose it, and we become just about being nice people as opposed to being the people that pursue what is right and what is just. And maybe as we learn to do that, God will capture the heart of some men around us. And just thirdly, in this passage, Jesus describes himself as a temple, or he says, if you knock it down, destroy this temple, I'll raise it again in 3 days. And of course, he's talking about his own body and about being put to death. And he mentions the temple. It's interesting, and if you think back to last week, he had the changing of the water into wine and those purification jars. So this is a special time for the Jews, the time of the Passover, the time for coming to a place of purity, coming to sacrifice, and coming to the temple, which they see as the place where they meet God. And Jesus has already said to them, well, there's something new here that's not just about purification rites. And then he says, well, actually there's something even more important. This temple that you're coming to, thinking that that's where you meet God, is not actually. You meet God in myself. So he's also saying this to them at this key time for them. But there's something interesting that stood out to me as I was thinking about this, is that Jesus here knew he was going to die, didn't he? He knew that he was going to be put to death. And he knew that these people would mock him. It says in it, he knew what was in a man. And despite knowing us, despite knowing that people would take the mickey out of him, that they would put a crown of thorns on him, that they would reject him, that they would talk about him, that say bad things about him, that they would talk behind his back. He knew all of that, but he still allowed himself to be the one that went to death. And that can be something that is good for us to remember. Jesus knows us entirely. He knows all the things we get up to and all the things we've done, but he still chooses to give his life for us. There's also a challenge for us as we walk the way of Jesus. How do we react when